right. There you go.
Great. All right, you want to talk Nakato at 62 points or Dan Hounds at 87 points?
Welcome to the Rugby Rant podcast show, your premier North American rugby podcast. Growing rugby, one fan at a time.
And welcome back, rugby fans, here to the Rugby Rant podcast show for episode 145. Myself and Rob at the helm here today in the absence of Scott Ferrara, the big guy himself. Myself, Ty Braga, and Rob Hammerschmidt will be with you all the way through. But of course, we have to take time first to be able to remind you that today we're first going to dive into Around the Pitch, sharing all the news from across the rugby realms in a quick fire round, back and forth between myself and Rob, whatever we think you should know, anything that we feel is noteworthy that you as a rugby fan in North America should pay attention to will take place there. Then we're going to take some time aside to dive into our rant, where we're going to be talking about the expansion draft, Major League Rugby, a new team on the horizon with the Miami Sharks. Exciting times, but some uncertainty for some players across the league. We're going to talk more about that and why the expansions draft exists, some of the benefits that lie beneath it, and we're going to share that in a few moments, but not before we take a moment to talk about Around the Pitch.
Now, before we get into that, Ty, real quick, we're talking about expansion. I just want to throw a shout out to my guy, Lerome White, big friend of the show, big boy here at the Hounds. He is expanding his family. He just gave birth to a 7-pound, 3-ounce daughter, Stoney, on July 28th. Want to congratulate Lerome for being a big papa.
All right, excellent stuff. Congratulations to Lerome and the family, as the family in Chicago continues to grow and as the rugby family always does. We'll be back in a moment with Around the Pitch.
When we pick up the ball, we also pick up a legacy. A legacy that stretches beyond your current team. A legacy built on the backs of those who came before you with hard work. And for those who will come after you, we promise it won't be easy. But we'll be there, supporting you on and off the field.
All right, Rob, you and I know how this goes, but a quick reminder for those fans, myself and Rob are going to dive into this one by one, sharing quick fire round after round, what we think is news you should know. And Rob, how about you start us off?
Thank you, Ty. Real quick, last week I talked about the men's and women's club sevens. It's going to be in Madison, Wisconsin, August 12th and 13th, $5 to get in. What I wanted to address this week is the teams have all qualified, 16 teams on the women's side, 16 teams on the men's side. I'm going to put up a graphic right now to show you what teams have qualified, some really good teams in there. It's going to be some exciting matches. I really want to see what the Bombers are going to do. They've actually done quite a nice job against the Lions to qualify, and there's some names of note on that team. And they start, at some point with Hammerschmidt's in there, but nevertheless, listen, this is going to be televised. It's going to be on, streamed on USA, Club Rugby YouTube site on Rugby Explorer, XPLORER. It's free to join. Ryan Ginty from Next Level Rugby is going to be producing the event, so it should be well done. I will be there. I'm going to join in the broadcast a little bit. One real quick note, Philip Clippins, who we've had on the show, he's Mr. Pickle Juice, talked about 2 WPL teams may not be there. So the women's teams is still in limbo as of recording today on Monday, just because there were 2 WPL or a WPL match scheduled, and those 2 teams are both involved in sevens as well. So keep your ear to the ground on that one. Let's see what happens on the women's side.
Exciting stuff as club rugby certainly is meeting its completion there, and what a great event. The Bombers, as you pointed out, going to be a favorite, certainly, not only because it's got the Pee-wee Hammerschmidt in the mix, but Nick Feeks and among other great MLR names that people might recognize. So certainly great to be able to see them continuing what they do across the nation. And I'm going to take us across to Boston for what was dubbed the Battle of the Border. The under-23 women's sides of both Canada and the US competing against each other, testing their mettle against these wonderful rivals. Sadly so, the US coming out the lesser in a 2-0 loss. That puts Canada above them consistently now in the women's division of the game. And certainly the US is taking their lessons learned and will continue to be able to apply it in the right direction, because that's the under-23s is the next generation of superstars for the women's game as we continue to explore new heights. But the scoreline is interesting. The first matchup was 24-5, of course, against the US, Canada coming out the victors. And on the second occasion, July 30th, just a moment ago, 55-14 in that second matchup. So USA certainly looking on every occasion to be able to take away what they can as a learning experience. And the learning never ends. Win or lose is the philosophy.
All right. So the second piece, again, we're on the pitch about stuff that you may not necessarily come across in, perusing social media and your rugby sites. This one, shout out to Sheila Falcon from the Rugby Times. There's going to be the NOLA Beach Touch Rugby Tournament. It's co-ed, and it's going to be on August 19th, 5 p.m. start. Going to have to start that late in New Orleans. Otherwise, the humidity is going to make you feel like you're in the devil's ass crack. But
it becomes a game of survivor,
Yeah, right.
Endurance rugby.
In Coconut Beach in Kenner, which is not far from the gold mine. It's 5 players on the pitch per side. They're playing on a 20-by-10 field, and it's kind of like hockey / lacrosse in that they have 2 attackers and then 2 defenders. And 1 female has to be on the pitch at all times of those 5. So it's a really unique style, really unique event, kind of cool. I like the creativity of it. And the idea is just about having fun and being social and enjoying rugby and enjoying the camaraderie of it. So you get 4 touches, by the way, to play in a 10-minute game. 4 touches. And it's a 10-minute game total. So 6 players per team allotted, 5 per side on the pitch, actually. So some really interesting take on rugby. And I wish I could go down and experience it myself. But, I don't want to fry my pasty skin up.
Well, interesting stuff and a bit of fun. I tell you what, for those, I'm remembering those days a while back when I used to do rugby training out on the beach in Cape Town, and that was among the toughest that we would ever do. Your calves would be crying because you got to push through that soft sand. It's definitely a workout, and it is tiring, and it is endurance. That much like for anybody who's played sevens, imagine doing that when the ground moves beneath your feet like it would be in the sandy pitch. It is a lot of effort. So I'm going to take the opportunity to dive into the next piece over here, and we're going to be talking Major League Rugby, highlighting some of the standouts of the 2023 career. Of course, it's that time to be able to look back and honor those great contributors to the game and the season. And we have now revealed the list of the best forward, best back, coach of the year, and the coveted rookie of the year. And in that order, we have back of the year. And perhaps no surprise for myself and Rob. I think we said all of these names, by the way, at least many of them I would go as far to say. Nate Augsburger, certainly a great a player and a wonderful legacy that he's already created at San Diego. But this was somewhat new as he moved down onto the wing this season, and it's provided an opportunity for him to shine in other areas and explore his own game, and certainly did well enough to be able to earn the prize of Best Back of the Year. Then we have the forward of the year, Vian Conradi. That would be from the Free Jacks. No surprise to be able to see two top teams finding two top honors. Congrats to Vian Conradi as well, being nominated for Namibia, representing his home country. And Coach Josh Sims, for Old Glory DC. Old Glory themselves had a stellar season. They've made it as far as they've ever been before. Unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough, but promising results over the year before and even the year before that. So we hope to be able to see them carry some of the momentum forward, certainly if they keep somebody like Sims at the helm steering that ship. Then we have to be able to dive into the most important one some people consider, Rookie of the Year, Sam Gola. Jackals take a bow. Why? This man certainly came out into the scene as one of those great powerhouses in rugby, certainly a long career, gets along with all his teammates, wonderful. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, Rob. You know this man very well. So, I'm sure, you would feel like any one of these guys would be happy to be able to have on your roster. But to have the Rookie of the Year identified, that's somebody who's going to be a part of American rugby for a long time, right?
Well, for me, the importance of Gala coming on the scene is the contribution he's going to make, we believe, to USA Rugby. I know I ran into Scott Lawrence prior to his selection and getting his 54-man and then 33-man roster. He had come to watch Dallas and the Hounds play, and I had asked him, who you watch? And he said, well, I'm really coming to watch Sam Gala, is one of the guys I really want to see play. And don't forget with Chavetta actually retiring and Greg Peterson getting,
windows are opening.
In the tooth. And there's the United States roster is bereft of locks. So it's great to see somebody like Sam Gala step into the fray. And he's going to be able to make a contribution, I believe, to the U.S. Eagles roster for sure.
Right. And for many years to come, because those are the type of players we want to be able to see take us on to even greater heights, onto more World Cup honors. So there you have it, around the pitch with Rugby Rant. And stick around, because we'll be back in a few moments to talk about the expansion draft recently announced, with the inclusion of a new side, the Miami Sharks, joining in 2024. Exciting times, Rob, and we're going to be diving into that in a moment, but not before we take a few moments to be able to share a few words from one of our partners who help us do what we do here on the Rugby Rant podcast show, helping to grow rugby one fan at a time.
Tighthead Brewing Company is not just Chicago's premier location to watch rugby and enjoy quality ales and lagers. It is also a great place to enjoy local acts performing live music every Thursday and Saturday nights. Additionally, their Wednesday night trivia nights are something not to be missed. Tighthead is located in Mundelein, Illinois, and easily accessible for many Chicagoans, as it is just steps away from the metro. Owner Bruce Durr and the Tighthead staff are dedicated to ensure your microbrew experience is as tight as their beers. Bruce's love for rugby extends beyond the origin of his brewery's name. Tighthead is committed to supporting the rugby community. This includes his support for Lake County RFC and our own Rugby Rant podcast show. Tighthead's tap room is like the familiar rugby clubhouse in which friends and teammates can meet, socialize, and enjoy the wide variety of brews on tap. Regardless of whether your palate enjoys a good IPA or dark barrel-aged brew, Tighthead can deliver. Hey, Chicago, when you want rugby, Tighthead Brewing Company will satisfy your thirst. Tighthead, it's worth more than a try. Welcome back, rugby fans. It is time for the rant portion of the Rugby Rant episode 145. And of course, as Ty mentioned, prior to exit and hearing from our sponsors, we're going to be talking about the expansion draft. As we all know, a lot of people anticipated, there's been a lot of buildup to the fact that the Miami Sharks are going to be joining the league in 2024. And of course, whenever you have a team join the league, there is an expansion draft. Now, just to clarify, because out on social media and Reddit and Facebook and every place else, some folks who are unfamiliar with the expansion draft, or folks that are new to the league as fans, they've been asking about this expansion draft and what it is and how it works. And so that's what we're here to do today, is talk about what this is, how it works, and what kind of impact we think it's going to have, and talk about some of those players that were selected. But before we get into that, just let me clarify, or let us clarify, there's actually 3 types of drafts we've experienced over the course of 6 seasons of the MLR. One of them is, in fact, the dispersal draft. We saw that with Glendale's exit, and we saw that with LA and Austin exiting the league. And, of course, the Hounds coming in, so that they picked up some of those players. There's also an expansion draft, which we've seen when we had new teams come in, like the Iron Workers and their former iteration as Rugby New York, Free Jacks, Old Glory DC, etc. And then we have a collegiate draft, which is going to be August 17th. We're going to do a show live for everybody. So I just want to clarify the 3 different types of drafts that exist, and they are different. They are unique. There is a little bit of overlap in how they work, and Ty's going to talk just a little bit about how they work.
Yeah, Rob, thanks very much. And I'm so glad that you took the time to be able to identify what different drafts have happened. And I will be among the first to be able to admit that it took me a while to figure out what is a draft system, as you and Scott gave me some extra lessons to be able to figure it out when I was first introduced to the concept back in 2020. But it's become an important part of rugby, professional rugby in particular, with Major League Rugby itself. But it's not really uncommon to fans in American sports culture, maybe elsewhere to the rest of the world, but it's entrenched in Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, and of course the NBA, the big 4 franchises or different leagues, I should say. And there's one more to be able to include in that list with the dispersal draft, which was the Jackals, because they didn't end up doing their first season. But so we've seen it a few times, but this is the first time we've seen the expansion draft. So it's a good time to be able to remind folks, well, where are we in this process? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about what is its purpose, right? What benefits might it have to A, the league, and B, to the team that's being introduced next season, which, of course, as you so rightly pointed out, is the Miami Sharks, which everybody's excited, really excited when they hear a new team is coming, but there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be done. Just ask the guys out in the Chicago Hounds how much they had to do in a short time. We want to be able to give Miami Sharks a little bit more of a runway, right? So that's the first thing that's important. But where we stand at the moment is this past week, 60 players were originally identified. That makes it 5 from each side. 12 times 5 is 60. Rob had to remind me about the maths before we started. Thanks. That's why he's a teacher. I'm eternally the student, I guess. So with that 60 in mind, they only really had to decide which of those players might they consider. And then they ended up with 25 names that have been revealed. Rob's going to dive into some of those names in a moment's time as I hand the microphone back to him. But of those 25, they have entered negotiations with each and every one of them. And they have until August 6th, which is a Sunday, I believe, to be able to finalize those agreements. Once they have done so and come to agreeable terms with those players, who, by the way, aren't obligated to be able to accept any offer given to them, but Miami is obligated to be able to meet any existing contract agreement, terms in any existing contract agreement that they've had with their previous club. So they have to either equal or better what they are currently getting. So why is that so? Because they want to make sure that they're not going backwards. I think that's an important point for folks to be able to remember. So of those selected players, we will know the names that will make up the initial start of the roster, help them to be able to build the foundation on eventually what will become that team. So really, August 7th, I'm sure we'll get to be able to start to see the trickles of who has signed and who has agreed. But I want folks to be able to know, just because the deals might be concluded doesn't mean every one of them is going to be revealed. This has kind of been a stickling point for many fans, right, Rob, is that people don't understand the separation between those two things.
Yeah, hey, and if you could touch upon something, Ty, that I think is really relevant for folks that are unfamiliar with the dispersal draft. First of all, why is it that it has to happen? Well, not necessarily on August 6th, but what's the significance of that date? And then the second thing, let's just touch upon why players aren't necessarily obligated to sign with the Sharks. I think that's a relevant element to address as well. I mean, just because those 25 players are revealed doesn't necessarily mean, as you said, that they're going to be in Miami playing their trade next season.
Yeah, and there are good points. I mean, the first one, let's tackle that, is why is August 6th an important date? Well, really, August 6th isn't so important. What's more important is that it happens before the MLR collegiate draft. Now, in my opinion, you want to be able to have the foundation of your team set from players who already have plied their trade professionally in the league, which means that you got some consistency. You also don't pull too much from one of the existing teams, thereby weakening the strength of their own squads that they've spent seasons trying to be able to build. But it does allow you to be able to have a core. It knows you who is experienced in your team to start before you go shopping for the next young superstar come the MLR collegiate draft, which, as folks may or may not remember, it's customary that whoever is newest to the league gets the first picks, I should say, which can sometimes be the best picks depending on how it turns out for them, right? And that's kind of the advantage it seemed to be able to be going for before the other sides. So it works in reverse.
Right. And we'll go back to your point during the around the pitch, right? Sam Gallo was picked first. The Dallas Jackals, right? So they have their first selection. They select Gala. Of course, he was, rookie of the year, and he's, jumping in with the Eagles, and he's an excellent player.
And that's exactly what you want. You want first crack at some of the best talent, and the MLR collegiate draft is that. I think it's undoubtedly so that teams and the league has embraced the concept of using the draft to their advantage, because look at the products it's already proven to be able to create. We had Connor Mooneyham. We had, I can't even remember all the names. I would be doing an injustice to even mention.
Well, Andrew Guerra. I mean, somebody on Reddit actually put out a really nice list of players who have made significant contributions to their team sides after having been drafted. And you mentioned Mooneyham. Let's not forget Taveti Lopetti. Is a USC.
I think of Bronson Tellis as well, who I think of. There's so many names, and that's the great thing about the MLR collegiate draft. So that was the first thing. The next thing is that players being approached by Miami Sharks are not obligated to be able to accept any deal that's given to them. But it is important that they've recognized that they have to either meet or exceed what they're currently getting with their side. And that's a really, really good point, talking about player welfare, which has been a hot button topic of late in rugby in America, right? Because you don't want to force players to be able to uproot themselves from where they finally find a home, move across the country with not much certainty. They also should be full-time contracts, I would hope, right? If you're going to be making a move like that. And this is something that's different from other leagues, where there has to be a minimum guarantee. And that minimum guarantee is building on top of what they previously were offered. And Rob, this I want to throw back to you, because we briefly touched on players that are going to be a part of this. I know you always spend a tremendous amount of time researching these young players, building relationships with them as you begin to be able to line up interviews for our own coverage of the MLR collegiate draft. So what are some of these names that stand out for you from this list right now, because you're kind of close to the subject?
Well, I kind of broke it down into three categories. So some selections don't make sense. And I think there's a recognition by folks that are out there, again, going back to social media, it left people scratching their heads a little bit. A few selections were young guys that, might be looking for a new opportunity, perhaps, a rebirth or just an opportunity to break through with another team. And then there's a few of these guys that make some sense with some context. So, I can address those, each individually, but it's kind of important to recognize, again, going back to Ty's point, these guys don't have to sign. So, here's an example to Ty's point. Joey Baki is here from Chicago. I know Joey. his contract is up. So it's kind of interesting. What does Miami have to meet or exceed if he's not contracted for 2020?
Yeah, that's an interesting gray area because essentially he's a free agent.
Correct. So, it's not like they have to meet any kind of standard contract that he's currently existing at because his contract is out. I found Caleb Strum from here in Chicago, speedy winger from Alabama, so it gets him a little closer to home. Again, not sure if, he was a standard contract player, an associate contract player, but he's a young kid who I think, can grow and develop. He's got a lot of pace, with some time, with some opportunity, can he develop into a significant.
And these are, you have to imagine some of the thoughts that are going through the minds of those in Miami is like, well, if we're going to pick a player, we want some longevity too.
Right. And a lot of Dallas fans were scratching their heads at Eric Naposki that he was being let go by the Jackals. Here's a guy who made some significant contributions. He was I can't remember what the draft, number was. Was he number one in 2022?
I think he was the number one in that year, right?
Yeah, in that year.
It certainly produced results for them as well.
Right. So, there's some interesting ones there. Again, those are the young guys. Some selections, like I said, didn't make sense, like Nick Feeks from Rugby New York, from the Ironworkers. Feeks announced his retirement. So why would Miami select him if he's announced his retirement? I've actually engaged with Nick a little bit, and he's locked into St. Louis. As a matter of fact, he's playing sevens with the Bombers.
Right.
His wife is working out of St. Louis now. He's, unless he's changed his mind, which is entirely possible. I hope to see him here in 2 weeks up in Madison. But unless he's changed his mind, he said, he's
a rugby player is always willing to lace up one more time.
Right. I mean, Miami in a bad place, but I just my sense is, and I'll get more context from that, it's probably not going to happen. He's going to be in St. Louis.
Right.
Eric Howard.
In that case, brilliant move from Rugby New York, right? Hey, let me put a guy on this list who I know is not going to play. And actually still counts as one of my five.
Right. Exactly. And that's, I think, part of what happens. My head scratching comes in.
Yeah. 5 names for them are about to retire. Good luck.
Eric Howard is another guy who's announced his retirement, Canadian international hooker from NOLA Gold. I just, again, I don't know why they would select him, but again, head scratcher. We're not sure about Troy Lockyer. He's, rehabbing a thigh injury from what Scott has told us. So, he's had rough 2 seasons. So, you get why the Ironworkers would release him, but you're not quite sure.
Right.
Why
and
Miami
this is again, I want to circle back around to the importance when Rob is saying, I don't know why they might select them. These are the 25 they chose of the 60. Now, they have selected them in a way. It doesn't mean it's going to be a done deal. But again, coming back to your earlier point, why on earth would you choose? Already you named 3 that are pretty much taken out of the equation because of retirement or injury.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is that they know this and they select them anyway because they know that they're not going to contract with them. They
what
have
would be the advantage to that
though? Because I think Miami's going to be loaded with Argentinians that they're going to bring.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's Argentinian ownership. There's a South American flair. There's already precedent of Argentinian players successfully being able to get game time here and visas and all that type of stuff. So, it's like, a South African coach brings in South African coaches. Right. Who would have thought? An Australian coach brings in Australian players. Who would have thought? It's kind of par for the course.
Yeah. So for me, I just think it was, maybe it was something they had to do. You have to pick 25 players. Okay, we'll pick 25 players, knowing that, that some of them are
the motions, so to speak.
Yeah. So that's one of them. But get to the next point. We talked about the Argentinians. You talked about visa issues. You talked about the Argentinian influence. The ones that do make sense are kind of interesting. Tomas Cesares, he is Argentinian, so he would fit in nicely with the side, as well as Marcos Moroni from Dallas. Again, another RG would fit in with the side as well. So you got to think that those that there was intent there by the Sharks to select those two players. And then another one that's kind of interesting, Alex Tucci. He's actually from Weston, Florida, which is northwest of Miami. He went to Cypress Bay High School, played a bit of rugby there as a young player, and then went and played college Florida. But anyway, that may have been something they've already had conversations with Tucci, saying, "Hey, look, do you want to come back and finish?" Because he's
and many players
finish your career, close to home.
Right, and that is a big factor because, again, to highlight the importance of why we bring this up, players in rugby in America are not making $1 million salaries. So many of the decisions have to be weighed against life and work balance, which, of course, work for them is the game that we love. But, of course, they have to uproot their families sometimes as well. So there's got to be secondary and tertiary benefits for them to be there. And there's so many pieces of the puzzle that make it right or wrong. And you have to look at it from like 17 different angles to understand each move.
Right. Yeah. And here's another angle. So I spoke with a GM this week who will go nameless at this point, but he made an interesting point. He said, the Free Jacks, of course, won the Shield this year in 2023. We know that the Ironworkers, who won in 2022, were heavily influenced by foreign players, largely New Zealanders. The Free Jacks, of their roster, 19 were foreign players, 14 were Canadian. Now, remember, Canadians are considered, they're considered domestic because of the Toronto Arrows are in the league. They only had 4 Americans on their roster. So why is this significant? I mention it because several players that were selected were Canadian. 4 that I looked at were Canadian. Shane O'Leary, and 3 of the 4 have been capped with Canada, so they come with some international experience. Shane O'Leary, 13 caps, some experience in Europe. Avery Odeman played Canadian U20s. And then let's see. We got, I can't even read my own writing now. Kano Lloyd, he's 29, 13 caps. And then Dawson, I forgot, I can't read my writing, but it's 25-year-old young guy, 2 caps. My apologies, folks. Anyway, you got 4 guys of Canadian lineage there. So again, they're considered domestic players. So that's an advantage for them to be selected. And obviously with their international pedigree, they come with some experience that they're looking for.
Right. And it is good. I mean, we want to be able to recognize Canada as a partner in American rugby because they are domestically and also, continentally. If Canada is doing well, so is the US and vice versa, right? So it's nice to be able to see that. But we can imagine, what happens after this is we have to be able to dissect, once the news is revealed, what their choices might have been. We've already kind of speculated as to some of the thought processes here. And of course, we welcome fans at home to tell us what some of their reasoning would be if they were in the position to be able to choose players and what they think Miami was thinking. And you can continue to be able to let us know on our social media handles, everywhere you may find us under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod. Myself and Rob and Scott always welcome any criticism of what we do, because that's what we do in rugby, is we like to be able to create these conversations. So let's turn the conversation for a moment though, Rob, and back to the expansion draft concept itself. Why is it a benefit to the league and the teams?
Well, obviously, I think it's a benefit for the league and the team, specifically the expansion team, in that you have players that already have visas that are sorted. So they don't have to bear the burden from, and you know this from firsthand experience, a visa is going to cost a team probably about $4,000. So they got to figure that into the cost to bring that player over, and I guess that's...
and the time and resources, everything factored into it. Yeah, it's a burden.
Right. And of course, Miami has a good run up. If they start now, they're going to be in plenty of time and plenty of stead to get timing wise to get those players in. But the fact is that they don't have to spend $4,000 to get that player a visa, and to get them here. So that plays a significant advantage. It also forces teams to be, to feel the burden of expansion. And what I mean by that is, if you didn't have any kind of requirement that teams release players, then you might see teams that perhaps release, let's say 10 players versus another team that only releases 2. That team that released more players is going to feel more of a pinch, more of a burden, especially in the depth of the roster than would another team. So it forces all teams to potentially feel that burden, that pinch equally, because they all have to release 5. So that's another benefit, I guess, is it kind of spreads the pain across the league and across all teams.
Yeah. Not countering, but building on that point though about, adding 5 players to your or releasing 5 players is the word I'm looking for. It could also be seen as somewhat of a benefit that if they have players and their squad is larger than they might need, it provides an opportunity to perhaps decrease some of the wages too, right? And free up some more space on the team for other players to be able to take a spot, to be able to go shopping at the MLR Collegiate Draft and go comfortably. So, hey, we can actually offer a little bit more because we have 3, 4, or 5 players no longer on the roster.
Right. My guess is that, again, if we take a look at some of the players that were named and then selected by the Sharks, you kind of get the idea that several of these players were already seen as being taken off the books,
right?
Via retirement, via the contract expiration. So I think that plays a significant factor into why certain players were available in the expansion draft, was because it was already kind of a foregone conclusion.
Right.
And again, had a conversation with a GM recently, there was a player of note that, was only on that 1-year deal and may or may not be back with that team depending on whether they sign. But, the GM said, hey, we're bringing in somebody that's going to be in that position that we believe is going to be better and better service. So it's not a great loss for us.
Right. Yeah, and that's professional game at any level, right? You have to be able to pick you would hope it's a meritocracy and you pick the best player for that spot and that role, but also aligns with the values of the team and the vision for the future. And that's a difficult thing to be able to do for a club that has even yet to play their first game. But it certainly does give them an advantage knowing that they can gather from this list of 25 players, at least a core group that they feel confident enough to be able to offer a contract who already have Major League Rugby experience. And as you so rightly pointed out, in some cases, may even have international colors representing Canada or wherever nation they may come from. Now, it could also mean that they have more of a run-up, as we said, that certainly than what Chicago had. I mean, you've been on the ground. You've spoken to a lot of people. Yes, you could argue that Chicago got maybe a better opportunity to pick players, but great players doesn't equal a great team always.
Yeah, well, and it was my experience having access to rosters and the rosters that were submitted each week by the teams.
Right.
There was, you had your 23 and then there were players that were like 5 or 6 roster, players that were put on the greater roster just in case there was an injury, let's say in the captain's run. Right. And you need to bring in a player there. There were many games, at least early on, where the Hounds didn't, they might've had 1 or 2 guys in that list that were an addition. So, really this one is about depth and building depth, which is why I have to imagine some of those young guys were selected, like Strom, like Baki, like Gianniscoli, and like Naposki, I think is going to be someone they're going to be looking for because he had significant minutes with Dallas. But that's why some of those young guys were selected.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope to be able to hear what some of the results are come August 7th as it starts to trickle out. My guess is that we're not going to see it in one open floodgate. We're going to be seeing it trickled throughout the off season as is a great marketing opportunity to continue to build momentum as they begin their rugby in 2024. I mean, if you're a great marketing mind, you certainly wouldn't shoot your load in the first shot. So you want to make sure that you drip it throughout the off season. But I would have to imagine that a name like Naposki might be one of the first ones they reveal, if it is one that they can reveal has been signed, sealed, and delivered, because you want to be able to show that it's a credible process, first of all, that it does go from beginning to end, and the result could be comforting for rugby fans who want to, or people who want to call themselves rugby fans of the Sharks, that they've got somebody who's a stellar talent that shows something bright for the future for them. Would you agree, Rob?
Yeah, and we know that their social media team does a really nice job at putting out their social media posts. We're supposed to get some kind of reveal. I thought with Kit, that was the belief. Early on, they led people, at least with their colors release, they led people to believe that their shirts and their jersey design was already a foregone conclusion, but I don't know that that's the case based upon some things that have happened recently. Mm-hmm. My concern with Miami is, remember, Mark Winokur was hired as a GM initially, and he is now out. And that early turnover is unusual.
Right. You have to think that there was something that went awry, whether it's vision, philosophy, or money, whatever it is. I mean, for a fallout to happen so early is not a sign of confidence right now.
Right. And it's just unusual. So I'll be interested to see what happens. I'll be really interested to see how they select in the draft and what direction they go. And obviously, we'll have to wait in the upcoming months to see what's dripped out as far as those signings.
Right. And we will continue to be able to reveal them as they come available to us and share them online under the handle at Rugby Rant Pod. But in addition to learning more about who may have been picked through the expansion draft, you want to continue to follow us to learn more about who might be picked in the MLR Collegiate Draft, because that's the next exciting thing to happen shortly following this August 6th date that is coming closer and closer for those players and the Miami Sharks. But make sure that you take your time to also pay attention to that next generation of superstars that are USA eligible, that might very well be those players that take the field in 2031 as we continue with that on the horizon in mind, to represent the United States and help them take them to even greater honors. Making it outside of the pool stage and into the quarters will be our next best achievement as USA Rugby. Rob and myself have enjoyed this here. Rob, you wanted to jump in for a moment?
I just want to remind viewers, we're going to be going live on the 17th to cover the draft. I think it's at 6:30. We're going to be coming, and that's Eastern time. We're going to be coming in a half an hour before. I've got Mike Matarazzo from the Hounds coming in. He's going to give his perspective as a guy who was in the draft and selected in the draft himself by Rugby ATL at the time. And then somebody who actually was in an expansion draft and was signed by another team, the Hounds, and just, going through, what it's like to be a young player, developing and coming through the ranks, just giving his perspective. And then, of course, we're going to have Ryan Ginty from Next Level Rugby join us. He's going to give us his perspective and thoughts as he follows things. So we're going to have a great show. We're going to really be looking forward to it. And I've got to button myself up here and become monastic in my studies of the draft over the next 2 weeks.
Well, you always manage to deliver, and it's one of the great things that you've continued to be able to push is paying attention to the next generation. I think that's something that fans have come to enjoy about you, Rob, and you really do live it. So let's again pay special attention to all of that. And thank you all for tuning in. This has been another great opportunity to be able to share with you what we do here on the Rugby Rant podcast show, episode 145. And we will see you all at the next.